Okay, hi there everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to our first Formations and Reformations in Catholic Thought lunch hour lecture series of the term. I'm Dr. Meredith Bacola, one of the professors in the Jesuit Center, which is usually located in St. Paul's College at the University of Manitoba, but currently a lot of us are working remotely, which in some instances is a wonderful opportunity for us to bring in speakers who we might not normally have access to. So I'd like to start out by acknowledging that the University of Manitoba campuses are located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories, we acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Now, I'm pleased today to welcome for our speaker series, Mr. Bo Gajda, who will be speaking to us today on Catholic social teaching, restorative justice, and the implications of post-release support for incarcerated individuals. And to that end, his title was focusing in on this theme from the book of Matthew, chapter 25, verse 36, that I was in prison and you came to see me. And Mr. Gajda has significant background and experience working in not-for-profit rehabilitation services and church ministry sectors. He has been both a retired prison chaplain with over 16 years experience with Manitoba federal minimum and medium security institutions. And in the community, he still continues to this day to work with church and nonprofit organizations and groups with social and restorative justice missions. To that end is that currently, and for several years actually, is that Mr. Gajda has escorted offenders approved for temporary passes to the Thursday Next Step peer group and support program, which is a core program of Future Hope's reintegration support services. And a lot of his volunteer work continues with them and with other organizations today. And I'm sure he'll have the opportunity to elucidate on that. And if you have other questions or comments, I'll ask you to hold them until the end of the talk, and then feel free to use the raised hand function or to include your question in the chat, and we'll have an opportunity to have a little bit more of a discussion and question period afterwards. So I'll let you, Mr. Gajda, take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Bacola. And for me, it is indeed a pleasure to come and speak on this topic. It's actually been a while since I've had an opportunity to do that, even though for in my retirement years, I have been involved in community-based restorative measures for support of post-release people. And I suppose I also should thank and put a shout out here to Dr. Michael Caligiuri, who is a colleague of mine on the Future Hope board, and who I understand put the idea on someone's ear at St. Paul's College that it might be good to have me speak. So thank you for the opportunity. Perhaps first of all, I can start with just a word about why I chose the title that I did. So first of all, from scripture, I was in prison and you came to see me in Matthew 25, verse 36, and following actually. And then subtitled, but very closely connected, Catholic Social Teaching, Restorative Justice, and the Implications of Post-Release Support for Incarcerated Individuals. How did I come to that? Well, along with a biblical blessing and mission that has always been front and center in terms of this work in my experience, I wanted to reference Catholic social teaching for two reasons. Firstly, my lived experience is within the Catholic tradition for all my various endeavors. Secondly, we're in the milieu of a Catholic Studies Center, as Dr. Bacola referred to moments ago, at least in spirit, and where this topic is examined, I'm sure, in the courses offered. But the full spectrum of this ministry or service to imprisoned persons is very ecumenical and interreligious in scope, as you'll hear later. For some Christians, and Catholics included, Matthew 25 may be like a bugler's morning reveille in boot camp. It is noteworthy, if not startling, in this apocalyptic scene in Matthew 25, that Jesus picks the imprisoned as one of the groups in need that he favors. Even if you are familiar with this Bible passage, I recommend reading all of Matthew 25, verses 31 to 46. By the way, you'll notice if you look up this chapter that the lead-in to this dramatic passage is a parable about talents or abilities the Creator gives us and how we put them to good use or not. I have found Matthew 25:36 to be the preeminent scriptural reference for Christians that challenges to be mindful of those in prison. However, the call to do social justice and inclusion is found not only in the sacred scriptures of all world religions, it unfolds over ages universally in the collected reflections, stories, and traditions of the peoples of this earth. For the Catholic Church, tradition, with a capital T, is important along with scripture in informing and guiding the lives of its members. It refers to the official teachings, known as magisterium, of the popes and councils over the centuries, and further explained and applied by bishops, priests, deacons, theologians, and many others in a variety of teaching and study settings, such as St. Paul's College's Catholic Studies. At the core of my consideration today, however, from the Catholic perspective, is what is referred to as Catholic social teaching, or CST. The Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition, a resource hub for this work in the United States, which I discovered just recently on the internet, provides a succinct summary of CST on their website. Quote, Catholic social teaching, pardon me, refers to the collection of official magisterial documents of the Catholic Church, which discuss a range of social issues, such as economic justice, war and peace, and sustainability. This website goes on to state that the Catholic social tradition has developed to include 10 core concepts, such as human dignity, call to family, community, and participation, rights and responsibilities, preferential option for the poor, dignity of work and rights of workers, solidarity, and care of God's creation. At this point, I would like to move to the heart of our discussion today. This coalition, by reason of its focus on prison ministry, highlights 3 of the core concepts as directly relevant to the criminal justice system and incarceration. And I'd like to take a moment to dwell on these, if I can get my share screen function to work. And I think it's there. I hope you're seeing it. So the first of the 3 core concepts is human dignity. And it reads, the human dignity of all persons is rooted in our common creation in the image and likeness of God. Neither crime nor criminal sentence can change this. Human dignity sets a high standard for the treatment of those currently and formerly behind bars, as well as their families. Then we move over to common good. Justice demands that our actions are oriented toward the good of all, excluding no one. To pursue the common good, We must work to ensure that all persons can participate and flourish in the community. By its very design, incarceration marginalizes and makes it a challenge to see incarcerated persons as full members of the community. Even after incarceration, marginalization persists. The common good requires us to actively promote one another's flourishing without exception. And finally, perhaps this is the favorite one for me, at least in its wording, option for the poor. If I remember correctly, it was the late Pope John Paul II who came up with this title for this concept in Catholic social teaching. And in fact, way back in 2000, which he declared at the time as a Jubilee year for prisoners, he had gave a lot of talks and a lot of reflections on how we should work with folks who are in prison. So the option for the poor draws our attention to those who are the most vulnerable. For any social issue, we must ask, who will bear the greatest burden? Who lacks a voice? And who is most susceptible to harm? The poor and marginalized are always and everywhere to be prioritized. The preferential option for the poor directs our attention to all those impacted by incarceration. In particular, it demands an urgent and prophetic response to the ways that incarceration reveals and creates racial and economic injustice. So, from that, I want to add, because I've discovered this, and again in my work, and it is also in my estimation, that the arrival and development of a restorative justice vision and its approaches to justice and community relationship breakdowns coincide very well with the three CST core concepts that we just looked at. The RJ perspective in justice work is not so much on what criminal laws have been broken and the determination of appropriate punishment for the offender, which typically is removal from society by incarceration, according to prescribed sanctions in law and precedents. RJ is concerned rather with the harms that have been done in the community to both direct and indirect victims of an offense. It seeks to facilitate reparation of harm to the victims and reconciliation of all towards healing in the community, including the offender, where possible. RJ principles of upholding and respecting the human dignity of all and seeking to heal the harm when relationships are hurt and broken have successfully been used in many contexts in the Canadian situation, as well as in other countries, including, for example, in schools, churches, communities, and families. RJ principles have also been introduced in criminal justice settings, mostly at community initiatives, but in my opinion, much more can be done. So let's move now a little more directly to the implications of post-release support for incarcerated individuals. And let me share just several examples of my experience in this work, particularly focusing on Winnipeg again. And in doing this, and the examples I picked, by the way, it's not because they're somehow super special or the exclusive ones happening currently or in the last number of years, but they're the ones I've had most experience with. So that's what I wanted to focus on. As I mentioned briefly earlier, this work is very ecumenical and interreligious in nature. And in fact, I would also add that in recent decades, it's even gone beyond the faith community. We've had good responses on the volunteer level, for example, for young people coming from university settings where they hear about the restorative justice approaches or just about the work that is being done. So the potential audience for drawing people for this work is gradually expanding, which I think is great. So for inside, and inside is an inside term referring to work inside institutions, for spiritual care and services in that context, visitors and volunteers have traditionally come from a range of Christian churches. And also in recent decades, as I mentioned, other faith communities. In my role as a Roman Catholic chaplain at Stony Mountain Institution, a key rewarding feature of my service was arranging connections within the Jewish and Muslim communities to provide spiritual care for their members, particularly, for example, in observing important moments in their religious calendars of observance. To the men serving time, as chaplains, we tried to provide tangible connections with the outside communities to which they would be returning. We reminded the regular volunteers who were so much appreciated by the inmates that by representing care, compassion, and non-judgmental openness, they were signs of hope for the men's return to society and potentially links to support upon release. The dynamics of working and relationships within the prison milieu are very different, though, from the post-release environments of outside communities. So the required skill sets and approaches for both staff and volunteers need appropriate adjustments as they move between these two worlds almost. I should also note here that the single federal institution in Manitoba, Stony Mountain, for those sentenced to over two years or more, is operationally very different from the 5 provincial correctional centers and the Winnipeg Remand Center. Now for the specific groups or organizations that I've certainly had the pleasure and been partnered with and assisted with over the years, especially as a chaplain. If my arithmetic is correct, Open Circle is in its 49th year of operation. It started under Mennonite Central Committee auspices and transitioned to Initiatives for Just Communities, IJC, an umbrella charity organization that manages 4 programs and was launched in 2010 by MCC. What is Open Circle? Prison Visitation. It's a nonprofit program that encourages volunteers to visit people in prison and offer caring, non-judgmental support. Just kind of a steady presence of friendship, if you will, over extended years in many cases. And in recent years, it had developed a post-release community support component as well. I might mention at this point that one of the coordinators for that program that I had the pleasure of working at for a long time, Murray Barkman, I used to tease or joke with him that, as a Catholic, we have a lot of fine social teachings about prison ministry and visiting people in prison. But you folks in the Mennonite community of churches, various denominations, are the ones who are actually putting those teachings into practice. Because if you look at the Canadian scene, even, certainly at the federal level, and I dare say even at the provincial correctional level, a lot of the involvement, a lot of the support from the community has come from Mennonite churches. So kudos to them for really responding that way. Another program, actually, of Mennonite origin is CoSA, Circles of Support and Accountability, and started in Winnipeg around 1997, according to my understanding. My involvement with it locally began in 2001, shortly after I became chaplain at Stony Mountain. Its aim is supported integration for safer communities and no more victims. It seeks to provide caring community in the circle format of core trained volunteers around people with offending histories who are especially at high risk of harming themselves and others. It seeks to provide supportive space to those integrated into the community after incarceration, so while they're on parole or probation, and even beyond that for some, because for some people, it takes a while to be oriented to how to live in a more complete and a healing fashion in the community. Participants who engage in the CoSA model have reduced a recidivism rate of 72 to 83% compared to people coming out of prison who haven't participated. And this has been shown in a number of studies, actually. Based heavily on the philosophy of restorative justice, the CoSA paradigm utilizes a holistic approach focusing on mending relationships affected by an offense, holding offenders accountable for harms they caused, and building stronger and safer communities. And now we come, I guess, to the feature group in the sense that it's been the one I've been most involved with, and that's Future Hope, right here in Winnipeg. It's a keystone principle, a motto is building productive lives away from prison. Inaugurated in August 2001 by the late Sister Carol Palaquin, a former chaplain at Stony Mountain, and a group of four parolees as Next Step, a peer support program for those seeking assistance in a positive reentry to community. Ever since 2001, weekly meetings and the occasional special events throughout the year provide participants with the space and time to find acceptance, belonging, learning, and an opportunity to safely share particular challenges or struggles of the week. However, more was needed. Stable, clean housing and employment are two of the biggest challenges for people post-release. With the support of the late Jesuit Father Dave Kramer and his religious community in 2008, a housing unit was released from the Winnipeg Housing Authority. Named Coyote House, it provides drug and alcohol-free transitional housing for up to 2 years in an intentional community environment. But longer-term affordable housing was still a challenge. To address this, Future Hope was incorporated in 2011. Situated next door to Coyote House, a one-time crack house was acquired, rebuilt with the enthusiastic sweat equity contributions of Next Step and Coyote House participants, and transformed into 4 one-bedroom self-contained apartments in 2014. This project was named Massey House after the late Jesuit Father Brian Massey, who was a proactive supporter of ex-offenders of this project. I just want to, at this point, quickly show you something on here. To illustrate the impact of this kind of support has on persons, Future Hope, to celebrate its 20th anniversary last year, published a collection of 75 stories by men who participated in its continuum of care. It's very informative and inspired reading. Two Steps Forward, Journeys from Prison to Community, and it's available through the Future Hope website. With the established need for such post-release support services, the Future Hope Board understood its need to grow and transition from the initiative spearheaded by its founding religious leaders to an organization that is more broadly community-based and thereby empowered and supported to provide development and expansion for its programs and services. With generous capacity building funding support from community organizations, Future Hope's transition has been progressing well. So in conclusion, and this rapid kind of overview, implications of post-release support for incarcerated individuals for me means benefits all around. To the returning incarcerated person, it can be assistance with housing, employment, or training opportunities, help to restart or improve family relationships, and discover new positive social relationships. Upsides for community neighborhoods include having someone move in who is not struggling alone to fit back in, but has positive accompaniment to become a responsible citizen accountable for their actions, including working at reparation for harms done. For society at large, the various levels of government, and all citizens as taxpayers, the enormous costs of incarceration can be reduced by providing adequate funding to this stage of the criminal justice continuum. And that's it, folks. So thank you very much. And I'll be pleased to engage in a Q&A or discussion with whoever would be interested. I'm just at this point going to put up a final shot of the sources that I used for this talk, for those who might want to get into further reading, especially that second one that's on the screen, the third one, the Compendium of Social Doctrine of the Church. It's actually a Vatican publication and provides a whole history of development of social teaching in the Catholic Church. I just had a quick look at it, and it's very, very deep and very thorough. So might be of interest for all those doing the Catholic studies particularly.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gajda, for that talk. It was wonderful, and if you're able to, maybe use the some applause as you can, or use an emoji so that he's aware he's speaking to real human beings out there in the world. That's always really helpful. And of course, we have an opportunity now at the end of this presentation to invite comments or questions from anyone who's here as an attendee. It's a wonderful opportunity to continue this discussion and to really get at some of the insights that Mr. Gajda's significant experience with the reintegration of offenders really does provide us in our Winnipeg community. So there is a raised hand function there on the lower part of your screen. If you'd like to raise your hand and invite a comment, feel free to, and we'll be monitoring the chat as well if there's if somebody's unable to unmute themselves and contribute. I can start out with one. Oh, Dr. McLeod, okay.
Yeah, a fantastic talk. Thank you very much, Bo, for that. It's always so interesting to hear about the great work at Future Hope. I was wondering, like, of course, it's all like explicitly Catholic when you're, caring for the people on the margins and things like that. But I wonder if you might share a little bit more about, like, how frequently or infrequently people are talking about, explicitly Catholic type of things as opposed to doing the gospel's work of caring for your neighbor, because I can't imagine it's like all the time.
Well, I'm glad you raised that because in my experience, apart from having the sign on my door when I was the institutional chaplain that said RC chaplain, I hardly ever talk Catholic, if you will, to the guys, because for two reasons. Because just the nature of the work is most of the guys that come to chapel don't come out of a denominational background necessarily. Yes, there are some who do, and you respond to that, and some who are interested in maybe inquiring into the Catholic Church even more infrequently. But really, I would say the chapel space was used just for basic human needs, basic psychological and emotional needs of the residents, the inmates, and they came for. It's a place where they could be more open, more themselves, and as I mentioned, particularly they appreciated the volunteers. Because while chaplain, he's paid to be here, and even if he or she is a good person, that's okay. But volunteers are totally coming of their own time, and there've been volunteers who would come literally for decades, in some cases, and so it's to provide friendship, it's to provide that sense of acceptance, and what was particularly rewarding for me and satisfying was that interfaith and in some cases no faith kind of dimension to my work. I just had to be there. I think as a human being, and again with the benefit of my training and education and life experience, I hoped I could offer something, but it was the Catholic aspect was I only called on as required.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
And I think you mentioned in your talk as well the incredible work that Mennonite churches have also been doing in terms of the CoSA, right? The Circles of Support and Accountability. And so,
yes.
It's very much an ecumenical and interreligious project.
Right, for sure. And I just finished my term on the national board of CoSA last October of 21. And I had the privilege of actually being in a planning group and then the interim board before we finally incorporated as a national association in 2015. And there are currently 15 or 16 sites across the country that have been supported, federally from a particular program from Public Safety Canada. However, that funding is expiring as of the end of March of this year. And typically, again, as we were, 5 years ago, the 15, 16 sites across the country are worried about funding, and that's almost the universal dilemma, for all of these types of organizations across the country. We haven't come across yet with a good formula to really be engaged with the budgets, of governments and kind of long-term funding, more stable funding. So that's an ongoing challenge.
I see there was a hand raised by Margaret Campbell. I've just invited her to unmute if she'd like to ask her question.
Oh, very good. Thank you. I was looking to see how to unmute. Can you hear me?
No worries. Yes, we can hear you perfectly, Margaret. Thank you. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for the Jesuit Studies for having these lunch hour lectures, and also for the our presenter today. My question is more specifically regarding my own education and work in prison ministry, or just work in the restorative justice sector as a future social worker. Do you know whether or not restorative justice is in a position in Manitoba to start to think about engaging with directly with social workers in field placement or in staffing, specific to the idea of restorative justice and post-release support?
Unfortunately, I'm not current on what's available at the moment. These things have certainly been in development, and in the whole restorative justice field, it's been a number of years, 5 or 6 years since I last had the opportunity to attend a restorative justice symposium in Ottawa. But I know there's all kinds of initiatives, and as I mentioned in my talk, the restorative justice uses social work discipline and folks with social work background in various aspects of this work, because in this continuum of when harms have been done and trying to address the harms, the various parties that are involved at a community setting requires preparation work of each individual party and scheduling and all the rest of it. So there are different skills and different talents and different gifts that come to bear on this. Locally in Manitoba, I'm not sure. I can't give you a direct answer for that. It's almost just asking around and just doing the searching on the internet. But I would expect that you would find you would readily find some points of contact that you could then follow up on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This was just kind of an initial thought when I was hearing this, having learned about restorative justice, and then being given the gift of this presentation. I thought, oh, well, let's just ask. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for your question, Margaret. Yeah. That's wonderful. Now we have one question in the chat from a Danielle. And so, Mr. Gajda, do any of these organizations work with children and young adults in juvenile hall as well?
They're focused, the ones I specifically referenced are work with adults, so 18 and above. Unfortunately, in terms of the criminal justice scene, most perpetrators, certainly at the federal level, have been men that we've worked with. Statistically, the vast majority. There are, of course, women's institutions. Federally sentenced women, unfortunately, from Manitoba, get as just one example of separation from community and family, get shipped out of province. Either to Alberta or west, east to Ontario or Quebec. The province, Manitoba, has a women's center connected with or associated with the Headingley Correctional Center that at least allows for family connections here locally, but maybe at the community level, where staff or and volunteers may be involved, there would be sort of indirect support for families, particularly partners of the one who's incarcerated and any children to support. The one that I know explicitly been talked about does work with women and children, and not just those having conflict with the law, but just those who have difficult, quite critical times in their lives, is the Elizabeth Fry Society, and they're located in the North End on Saukuk Avenue, but they do specifically talk on their website about working with children and with women and supporting families. So
wonderful. Thank you for that question, Danielle. And I see Dr. Michael Caligiuri's hand is raised, so I'm going to invite him to unmute and ask his own question or share a comment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gajda, for this presentation. Hopefully you guys can hear me.
Yes. Yeah.
Sounds good. I have a very specific question, which is this. In the history of when you were working there over in the institutions, what does someone get from the government when the door is open and they're let out? What does someone get to take out the door with them when they are released?
It's always been very minimal. It's improving gradually, even at the provincial level. Don't quote me on this, folks, again, because as I say, I'm not in the day-to-day, week-to-week sort of forum anymore of prison chaplaincy. But actually, just in the recent work we've been doing at Future Hope and connecting with Manitoba Corrections, we're trying to expand our services and what we can offer in transitional housing to the provincial scene, because we've up in our 20-year history so far, we've basically focused on working with the federal institution. And that's largely because of what the founders started, Future Hope founders started. At any rate, at the federal level, there's no particular bonus or any kind of pocket money to get you started when you walk out those doors. If you're on, and typically it's a gradual release system, so you come out on parole, and often you need to be in supportive housing, supervised housing, either at a halfway house or a CSC's, Correctional Service Canada's Correctional Center. While you're there, you're kind of provided, given some support. I don't know what the monetary values are now, but you don't have any extra money or clothing or anything like that. You need to provide for that. Your personal documentation may sometimes be disorder, like your health card, the driving license, all those core kinds of things that you need to before you even begin looking for a job. And if you don't have a stable street address, you're really in trouble. And same applies in the provincial scene. The provincial scene now, again, it depends on the individual if they get involved in some of the support rehabilitation programs. For a lot of people, addictions and mental health issues have become increasingly a problem. If they begin to address those with the help of counselors in the correctional center or federal institution, they can then be put into a program that helps them with that and actually begins to line up some support. And with the province, they've actually, I think, formally made taken more steps in a restorative justice way to provide reintegration support. And I'm actually looking forward to learning more about that as we engage in this conversation with the province about partnering, because the need for transitional housing is great. It's just great all around. That's all I can tell you, Professor Caligari, in terms of the response to your question.
And that was perfectly adequate. Thank you. We can piece from this that if you don't have an address when you're coming out, then this gets even worse for you, since you won't have a driver's license or health cards or IDs or birth certificates or anything else. You basically get to start all over again. You're at square one. Yes. So it even sets up a dual class of people that are being able to be released. Those that have housing and those that do not. And those that do not, well, I guess the odds are they wind up on the street. But thank you for your answer very much.
So I think we're coming up to the end of the hour here. So I'm cognizant that we've got students and professors that need to head off to class. But I'd really like it if we have one last chance to thank Mr. Gajda for his really encouraging and hopeful talk today on the possibilities in regards to post-release support for incarcerated individuals, because I think there were a lot of ideas there that merit further reflection and consideration, and particularly some acknowledgement for some of the incredible work that volunteers in our community are doing in terms of reintegration services. So thank you again, Mr. Gajda, and please join me in any way you can in applauding one last time.
And just very quickly, I was remiss. I thought of it different times and then I didn't write it down, so it slipped my mind this morning, that St. Paul's College, you know, in terms of their sort of community outreach program that they've had all along, and encouraging students, you know, to be involved in giving, you know, not just focusing on their own studies and the pressures of studies at the university, but to, you know, pay forward and to share with others. They were, one visiting was allowed, and again, because of the pandemic, that really got suspended. But they were key. We had a whole group of students would come out regularly during the school, the terms, once a month to spend time at our Saturday night service. And that was really appreciated by the guys who came down for that. So kudos to St. Paul's for that, and hopefully that can be rejuvenated once we get going into whatever kind of new normal we get into.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Okay, take care. Yes.